Maybe. I just don't care.
Welcome to A Piece of the Action. I'm Micah.
I'm Eric.
I'm Greg.
And in this series, we're going to be taking a closer look at some of the most voted on games, according to BoardGameGeek.com. And the one that we're going to start out with today, number one, as far as that goes, is the game Catan, formerly known as Settlers of Catan. And I guess my first question to Greg and Eric is, how do I say that? Is it Catan or Catan?
I believe it is Catan, I think.
Catan.
I actually did a lot of research on this at one point in time.
Really?
Yeah, I did, because I had to, the way that I figured it out was I actually looked up a video of Klaus Teuber, the designer of the game, speaking in German in a German interview, and I listened to his interview till I heard him say Catan, because I feel that if someone gets to say how a name should be pronounced, that's not a real name. It would be the designer. So
sure.
I believe, if I recall correctly, he said Catan.
Okay,
So
well, my obvious follow-up question would be, did he say his last name as Teuber? Or are you guessing about that?
I don't know.
Right.
I think he did.
Okay.
I think I've heard most people say Catan, actually. I think most
Really?
people say Catan, yeah.
All
That's
right.
what I've heard.
I don't know.
Well, fortunately, to eliminate all the confusion, they reduced the title from Settlers of Catan.
That was the hard part.
Just the one problematic word. So
Right.
that's the only thing I have to deal with.
I'm pretty sure it's Seedlers of Catan. I'm pretty sure. It's
Seedler, yeah, Der Seedler or something. So it's a German game, as you mentioned, German designer Klaus Teuber, we're going to say. And it's been around since 1995. So really the granddaddy of
25 years.
25 years. And I feel like, I personally, in my experience, a lot of people who don't know anything about any other board games have heard of this one. So, Greg and Eric, you guys sat down and played it recently. And so we're going to get kind of your guys' thoughts of it. First of all, Eric, maybe you could give us a brief overview of the game.
Yeah, it's a resource management game. Would you agree with me on that, Greg? It's kind of a resource management game.
Yeah.
I don't want to call it. I don't want to call it a worker placement game at all. There's no workers.
No,
but
I don't
it's
think
area control. It's a little bit of area control and a little bit of resource management. Okay, the way the game plays, just real briefly, is you take turns generating. The board generates resources in the form of cards. There's only 4 resources in the game. You then try to trade those resources to get what you need for your turn, and then you use those resources to build things that are going to generate more resources in future turns. So it sounds very simple. It is pretty simple, but the complexity comes out in the randomness of the board and the what's the word? The capriciousness of the players, I guess. So if they're willing to trade with you or not, that's the quick and dirty of it.
What is the story of Catan? Who are you? What ostensibly? Who are you playing the role of a settler? Is there some place called Catan?
In the slightest sense of the word, you are playing a role as a settler of an island called Catan.
Okay.
And you were there with a few of your buddies, and you're trying to take over the island. The island has a bunch of harbors on it. I don't know how the harbors got there before there were settlers, but whatever. And now you're trying to dominate this. So yeah, there is a very vague theme in the sense that there's an island that you've all gone to, and you're trying to populate it. But really, it's about resource management and area control.
Okay. All right. Good. So, Greg, you have anything to add to that? Any other thoughts initially going into this game? I think you guys have both played this game a decent amount
recently.
ahead of time, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of always been around. I think you said about how, in my mind, there's different kinds of board gamers. You have the kind of the mainstream games that you see in Walmart, like Monopoly, Clue, those kind of games. And then you have the hobby gamers, right? The people who are on Board Game Geek. I think there's very few games that cross in that if there's a Venn diagram. I think the one that's the most squarely in the middle of that is Catan.
Mhm.
You hear Catan like mentioned nowadays on national television. It's like there's like news articles of like the Green Bay Packers playing it. Like you can say Catan in any social situation, most people have heard of it. Considering that it's like a German family game from 25 years ago, I think that's pretty impressive. I mean, Monopoly's like 100 years old. So they say like, or some people mention that there's like a trinity of games that have caused like the golden age that we live in, and that is basically comes down to Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering, and Catan. It's just that influential in the hobby, right?
It didn't take long. 25 years isn't a long time
yeah.
to get that level of fame.
Yeah, and I think it's gotten to the point now where it's so popular that it's kind of become cool to hate on it a little bit. It's one of those now hipsters.
I didn't know that until I started looking at the other YouTube videos on this, and yeah, people were responding to how much hate this game gets. It's okay. Spoilers, Micah. It's a great game. This is a great game, in my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But we'll get to that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
There's people out there like there's whole groups of people in college that only play Catan. Like, and they never look for other board games. They just buy all the expansions. There's whole groups that are just devoted to playing Catan. There's world championships for Catan. I mean, it's just it's a solid enough game to sustain a weekly board game group for some people.
Right. And so we'll get into this, but I wonder then a lot of this. I wonder how much of it is the edge that it has by being so old that just it got its foot in the door. I mean, look, I would expect that games that have come out in, say, the last 5 years would have had 20 years to learn from these older games and would have improved on them. So it wouldn't, really surprise me to find that newer games are doing some of the same things that these old games did, but doing them better because they've had a chance to capitalize on it. On the other hand, Catan will have had 25 years to come out with expansions and to build a following and to build, a fan base of people who've grown up playing it. And now you can have, tournaments and leagues and all this widespread stuff. But how much of that is because of the fact that it's really such a good game in and of itself that it merits all that, and how much of it is just because it was the first one out the door, so to speak? What do you guys think?
I think when Catan showed up, it wasn't a slow burn to get to where it's at now. It was instantly a classic. Like it instantly changed people's minds about what you could do with board games. So yeah, I agree. Like people will play Monopoly still to this day because it has history. But Catan, even though it has history now, 25 years of it, I think it was a classic from the get-go. It's a very well-designed game, and it does things that other games didn't do, and more importantly, it does it in a balanced way, unlike Monopoly and other things.
I don't think it was the first to do what it does. I think what made it so popular is it was the first German family game to make it big in America. That's what caused the boom. I think it was the first one.
What do you think came before?
I mean, there's plenty of games that like exactly at those years. Like it was El Grande. I think was El Grande before Catan. I mean, there's a lot of like German family games that were out before Catan. It's just that Catan
but it's the one that stood the test of time, and you think that's
and I think it's
El
primarily
Grande's still around.
Yeah, El Grande is, but I mean, there was games before, like I think Hare and the Tortoise. I mean, if you look at like, okay, so Catan won the Spiel des Jahres, right? That award's been out since like I think '79 or something like that. So there's plenty, and those are rewarded specifically to German family games. So there's many games that won that award before Catan did.
Okay.
So what was it about Catan?
But
that made it
Catan
break
is
out
the
like
one that people are still in a widespread way playing 25 years later.
It was the first one to be brought over to America in such a way that it was. I don't know. I mean, so I'll admit to it. I was 15 years old when Catan came out, and I was not into board games like I am now. So I wasn't there to experience the bang of Catan firsthand. So other people can probably comment on this more. I don't know how it changed the landscape firsthand. I can only hear about it. But
Well, it
you
did
know,
here in the United States at the very least.
yeah. But I think, yeah, from what I understand, the history of it, Catan was the first one to make it big in America,
Right.
probably through promotion. It's just the way that it was sold. Someone picked it up, an American publisher picked it up, brought it here.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that just
I mean,
blew
and
people's
that's
mind
really,
because the games back then in America at that time were like Avalon Hill. It was very
yeah.
dice chucking. I mean, it was very thematic games, and here you have this game that's very simple. It's all about the simple, elegant mechanisms, and I think that's kind of blew some people's minds.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and actually, that's a good segue for us to begin to get into some of the aesthetics of the game, how it plays, how it feels to play it, how the components work together. What do you guys think as far as the job that Catan does for evoking a particular type of feel?
I don't think that I don't think it tries to evoke a particular theme.
Hmm.
I think the theme is that you're settling an island. That could be
But
anything.
apart from stating that at the beginning, there's no real. You don't
Yeah,
really feel like
there's
you're settling an island when you're playing it.
no. I mean, you don't. The theme facilitates the things you can do in the game, but the things you can do in the game are not. They don't make you feel. I don't feel like I'm settling an island
Hmm.
when I do it. I have a great time, but
Hmm.
it's apart from any kind of thematic sense that I'm getting from the game.
Yeah.
I think this is one of those games where the theme is there just to provide nouns and verbs for you to use in the game,
Hmm.
and that's it. It's not trying to evoke the feeling of you settling an island. I don't think the theme is just there because it's easier to remember that your settlement becomes a city than to say your level 2 disc becomes a level 3 disc, whatever, you know.
Right.
It's the verbiage the theme is there for the verbiage. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. And as far as, I guess, does that extend then to the physical components as well? I have one second, I have the box sitting behind me here.
When's the last
But
time you played it, Micah?
gosh, did we play it, Greg, did we play it over at, what's it, over at Mox? Over at the
No,
cafe?
that was Carcassonne.
Yeah, okay. So,
Is that
I
also
don't
on the
know.
list?
I don't know the,
Next
yeah.
game actually,
Have
technically.
you ever played it?
Yeah, I don't remember if I've ever played it. So, but I can tell you, I opened the box up, and well, hold on, let me get it. I'll show you. Here we go.
Oh, those are the old ones.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so this is like, okay, I feel like this isn't exactly, I don't know, maybe compared to what you see on modern games, this stuff isn't
Well,
exactly blowing me away.
I'll tell you something about it. First off,
It seems like it's got a little bit of a dated look, but that would make sense if it's 25 years old, right?
okay, so it's 25 years old, but also when you put that map together,
Yeah.
it has a nice footprint on the table.
Hmm.
It's big, like uh, uh, it's large for the game that you actually get to play on it. Like when you actually put the whole thing together, and it's modular. So if we're talking about components, the real shining spot here is that you put it together randomly. In my opinion,
Hmm.
that seriously helps the game because
Hmm.
it adds to replayability. And the most important part of the game is the beginning, the first your setup, where you put your first pieces, which is determined by the random setup of the board. So, and I know, Greg, you like to do puzzles. You're always like trying to think of board games in a puzzly kind of way. To me, when we played Catan, when I saw the board, I was like, okay, this is the puzzle, and I'm like, I can just figure out where to place my pieces. I win.
Sure,
You know.
sure. Yeah, my feeling on the components and the theme, I love these themes.
Hmm.
You know, for me, what I like about Catan, um, is representative of an era that doesn't exist anymore in board games, and that is that old classic German family game. Um, And when people look at this pastoral theme, and it may look boring, but for me, it just gives me a warm, fuzzy feeling. I like these themes. Trading in the Mediterranean, I like these themes. They're just very pleasant worlds to be in for me. They don't get in the way of the mechanics. They're not too loud. They're a kind of a game that I can sit down in front of anybody, and anyone's going to go, oh, okay, this looks okay. I'll play this. Or if you set down something with
It doesn't.
aliens and lasers, they're like, oh yeah, you're nerdy hobby. But
Yeah, it doesn't
Catan
have to
just
all
looks.
be post-apocalyptic volcano robots.
Yeah, exactly. And with the components, I'm of the mindset I have a pretty wide berth that I will allow components to be within before I start either thinking these are amazing or these are bad. My question is,
Except when it comes to paper money.
Paper money is horrible. No, I
Is there any
disagree.
paper money in Catan?
There is no money in Catan. I disagree with paper money. But for me, Catan is just, it's very simple, right? It doesn't need to be fancy. And everything it does, the components are there for a reason. I feel like I can see the board. It all makes sense. Nothing's getting in the way. It's not too loud.
Here's the thing. I've heard a million reviews of Catan, and they all kind of sound like this, right? They're always like, yeah, it does what it needs to do, and it's like, but I think that actually undersells it a little bit, because I actually think that Catan, it does a bunch of different things. And yes, you're right, it's not too complicated, but the way those things weave together makes a really, really good game. Like I think the balance between the randomness of the board, the trading aspect, the which is kind of like Pit. You remember Pit?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an old game.
I know, but that aspect of like trading back and forth in Pit, you get a little bit of that in Catan. You get a little bit of course, it didn't exist at the time, but you get a little bit of Ticket to Ride aspect and making your roads. It does a lot of different things. It's got a little bit of gotcha or take that with the robber. It's got a bunch of different stuff that I can see so many games that came from Catan that got its ideas from Catan. But Catan just the only thing. Well, we're not going to get. I don't want to get into that yet, but it's a little long, in my opinion, for what it does.
All right. So then maybe let's talk. So it sounds like you're both kind of in agreement, though, that where it shines is not in the pieces, well, not in its production value, so to speak, but in the actual mechanics of play, and that when it comes to and that they've dressed it up in just enough theme and just enough quality of pieces to convey the mechanics, but then that's the core thing that you're trying to enjoy. So let's talk about the mechanics a little bit. Maybe Greg, you want to give me an overview of? We don't have to go into a ton of detail, but roughly mechanically, what are you doing, and what are some strategies that maybe might, we're not trying to give a strategy guide here, but someone who comes in and has the rules explained to them for the first time, what are some obvious things to you think that a person could focus on in terms of strategy?
I mean, there's a world championship for Catan, so I'm sure there are people out there that can give some in-depth strategy to Catan.
Yeah.
And I've only played it a few times. But
and we're not trying to do that at all.
Yeah, what I feel like with my goal in Catan when I sit down, because you roll dice. The thing is, of course, the resources come randomly. You roll dice, and depending on which number gets rolled, and if your settlement or your city is on that hex, one of the vertices of that hex, you collect that resource. My goal is just get on the high probability hexes, which sounds obvious. It sounds obvious, but when I first started out, I don't care what the resource is. My goal is to collect as many resources as I possibly can. And I know when the robber moves, it's going to go down to 7, but I feel like that's a silly thing to worry about. You just go for it anyways. And I feel you'll figure out a way to convert those resources into what you want eventually. Now, that's the one thing I do. And then the second thing I like to do anyways, and this is the way I like to play, I look for a high probability hex that's close to one of the ports that I can trade that resource 2 for 1.
Okay.
Because it removes one of the annoying aspects of the game, and that is trading with other humans.
That's
Right.
not annoying. That's amazing.
No. But what I mean is, it's also unpredictable
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
the humans can decide to like just not trade with you because you're winning, right? And
Yeah, well, like you said
as
before,
they
it can
should.
be capricious. Right.
Well, it
They
also
can
takes
be.
away another aspect what I find annoying is when the dice shut you out of a certain thing. So if you can, if you have a way to convert something into something else, you have a way to mitigate because it's a dice rolling thing. So you're going to chuck some dice and see what comes up, and that's what you're going to get generated. Well, typically you're going to get hosed in at some point because the dice just won't come up. They won't produce
Sure.
what you need. So if you can find a port that can convert something that you make a lot of into something else, you can mitigate that a little bit.
Yeah. So,
Um,
like example, in the game we played this week, there's one I don't know what they're called, meadow pasture, the sheep hex, and I got 3 cities on that. I was the only one on that, and it was like a 6, I think. And so every time someone rolled a 6, I got 6 sheep. And so by the time it came, there's one
so
round
almost
where
your
it came
hand
back.
limit right there.
That's the thing. I think you got to ignore that hand limit business.
You do.
Because what are you going to do? Like, I'm not going to get too many resources because I don't
Right.
want the robber to come take it away. You just go with it. So there's one round where like a person that hex came out twice before my turn, so I had 12 sheep in my hand, and I had the 2-for-1 port. Those are basically wilds at that point. These are 6 resources of whatever I want. You know what I mean? I mean that's not going to happen every time, of course. It's a lot of randomness there, but I just feel like get the resources, figure out what to do with it later. Because I mean, you can trade with people too. Like, hey, you can eventually trade with the game 4-for-1. But I mean, you can trade with people like even if you don't have the sheep port, I can say, hey, I'll give someone 2 sheep for an ore. And people will more likely take that.
I wanted to say something about that too, as far as strategy is concerned. I think people are oftentimes too afraid to offer 2 cards that they have for one of somebody else. Like they always want to do a 1-to-1 trade.
Sure.
I think you need to be willing to make it a little sweeter for them if you've got like 12 sheep in your hand, for instance. Also, I do think that there is. So here's the interesting thing. The first 2 things you're going to be making in the game are roads and settlements. Both of those things are expensive when it comes to brick. So I think that there's a slight advantage to getting brick early on. What do you think about that, Greg?
Maybe. I just don't care. I guess for me it's like
If
my
you can
thing.
find a brick, if you can do bricks and a brick port, like your thing with like it doesn't matter if high percentage is more important. I'll grant that. Getting a high percentage hex, but if that high percentage hex is brick and you can be next to them, of course that's the perfect setup. But I just think brick comes up a lot. There's always a shortage of brick.
Sure, but if you have a high percentage hex of brick next to a brick port, then you just take it because that exists, right?
Yeah.
I'm not taking it because I need brick early. For me, it's like your strategy should change depending on what the board gives you. And if I can't get what I need to build settlements or roads, well, let me get a bunch of development cards. Those are pretty
Well, that's
powerful.
the other thing about the game that I like is that you can't win with one strategy. You can't just go for longest road because that's only 2 points. You can't just get development cards. You'll get longest road. You'll get biggest army, but that's again only 2 points. The game's 10 points.
Sure, but
you have to do some other stuff.
There's victory points in the development deck too. But my point is just collect the resources, as many as you can, and then look at, okay, how can I convert this into points? What I'm saying is I think basically if you start thinking about, oh, I need this resource or I need this resource for this early, I think if you just ignore that and just look at the numbers on the map.
Well, you did win last time, so I guess I can't argue with you.
Here you go. Okay, where's the 8s and 6s bunched up at? I'm going to go there. I don't care what they're giving me. I'm just going to go there. And if you have a handful of 12 cards, you can do pretty much whatever you want, right?
All right, you folks at home. If you want to play games in a boring, soulless way, listen to Greg. Yeah. But if you want to enjoy Catan for what it really is, think about it an amalgam of many different games. Do you want to trade with do you want to play a psychological game? Do you want to play mental kung fu with your opponents? You should play Catan.
Yeah.
Do you want to play a worker placement style game where you're just putting things down, hoping that the dice roll a dice chucker? You should play Catan. But don't math it out like Greg.
I'm not
that just
mathing it
leads to
out.
victory.
I can
Boring
do
old
both
victory.
now.
Who cares about victory?
I can do both now. While I'm doing the math, I am envisioning my settlers building up their villages. So Jim became
You're
a blacksmith.
captivated by their personal stories, as
Yes, of course. I mean, so Jim became a blacksmith.
Mhm.
That was his job. He made a pretty cool sword.
you.
That was what he did. While I was also collecting sheep over here, which was collected by Sue. That her family is amazing shepherds.
Mhm.
You know, just because the party's in my head doesn't mean there's not a party going on.
Right. Okay. Very good. So, and obviously we said it, but we'll say it again, that those are just preliminary takes on basic approaches. Not even that we would go so far, perhaps, as to call them strategies, but just approaches.
Oh yeah, I mean I lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it boils down to the strategies. If you just want to, what you're doing in the game is you're looking, collect resources, and then figuring out what to convert those resources into. I think you can go for, hey, I want to get longest road. That's a valid strategy because you'll also be getting settlements, upgrading the cities. I do think collecting development cards, if that's the resources you're collecting, can be a valid strat. There's some powerful cards in there.
I don't think there are, but well, over half the deck is night cards, and
Sure.
and if you get that, okay, I think that is a valid strategy because you'll then be able to move the I almost said Joker, the thief around, and you'll get something for that every time. You'll steal
Sure.
something from someone else. But
there's like the Monopoly.
I know, yeah, that's
Monopoly
great.
card. The
I
one
just
that
don't
won
think
me
it's
the
gonna win.
game was the one that I could just take 2 resources of whatever I wanted from the bank.
Year of plenty.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that you don't build it all on the map.
The thing about
Only take,
what's the cost to get a development card? I think it's a sheep, a ore, and a wheat. Is that right?
I don't remember. I actually didn't go development card strategy, but I'm just thinking I could see it. I could see you focusing on it more if that's the cards that you're getting.
They load, and you're saying they load enough into it that it's not unrealistic to think that someone could focus on that and be successful.
Well, what I'm saying is don't focus on one thing. I think that's where you get in trouble at.
Oh,
Like,
that's
hey,
what I'm saying.
yeah, hey, I'm just trying to like build up my cities, but hey, I got enough resources to buy 2 development cards. Well, get the 2 development cards. You know what I mean? If that's what
Right.
you.
So it seems like I think a lot of times with these games, tell me what you guys think of this, because Greg, to your point that you kind of want to respond to what the board gives you, and going along with that, you want to respond to what the other players do. It seems like pursuing the option that will open the most potential doors for you in the future, that will give you the most options, is probably, if you've got no other bright idea for some sort of master plan to conquer the game, going for what gives you the most future options is probably a good strategy, because then you are free to have more choices to respond. And if it sounds like what you're saying is that the thing that gives you lots of options is having lots of resources, because then you can choose how to use them. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's basically what I'm saying. Just, in my mind, just get the highest probability spots as you can. Which seems kind of obvious, but I don't know. Instead of worrying about this other
obvious,
stuff,
but
put that
it's
at number
correct.
1 priority. Just who cares what you're doing? Just get the high probability spots and go with it from there.
And I agree 100% with that. I would just say that that it seems like early game you're going to want brick. I would take a look. So if I had an option between ore that was at a 7, or not a 7, no, that's the robber, but a 6, and a brick that's say a 9, I might actually, or a 5, I might actually put the settlement there on the brick, just because that's going to
The
get
brick
you
has
need
more
the,
utility to
yeah,
offset it.
in the early game especially.
Mhm.
The thing about settlements they require the most different resources. So you need 4 different resources to create one settlement, and it's kind of a cool feature of the game that it bottlenecks you there. I think the idea there is it's forcing you to trade, because settlements, you need to have a settlement before you can have a city, and chances are that you're not going to have, all 4 of the resources that you need that early in the game. So you're going to have to trade.
I think one of the reasons they do that too, in my opinion, if I can tell you what Klaus Teuber was thinking when he made the game,
Please do.
was
You do speak German and know him very well, so.
he's my good friend. It bottleneck because you're forced to build 2 roads before you're allowed to build the settlement. The roads are pretty cheap, but the thing about it is if you build those 2 roads, you're signaling to the whole table, I plan on building a settlement here. And if you're playing with vicious players, they can block you. And I think that's a small point of genius in the game. And with the robber, you can't just like hold all the cards in your hand and wait till I can build 2 roads in a settlement, because that robber could hit at any point. You lose half your cards. So the game kind of forces you to build as you go. And I like that aspect of the game. Where it's like, I want to build a settlement over here, and I'm telling you where I'm going to go because I have to build a settlement first. And now I'm bottlenecked here at the settlement one, which requires these 4 different resources. And that might take me a round or 2 before I get those goods. I like that aspect because it forces some interactivity with the players. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, so overall, then, looking at your experience with the game, both the most recent time you played and in general, first of all, what are the positives? Eric? I mean, you told me it was a great game and I should buy it.
No, I was wrong.
You got
No,
nothing?
it's one of those things where it's like when a school of fish swims together. You know why they do that?
It looks cool.
It does look cool, but it confuses the predator. And so
Okay.
here I am trying to think of like one thing that I like about this game, and there's just too many. Now I really love this game.
Mhm.
I actually owned this game and somehow I lost it. So, and I played it many times in the past, but just a couple days ago was the first time that I played it recently. That's not true. I had the app, and I used to play it a lot on the app. I like it. It feels like a bunch of different little games that work seamlessly together into one to me. I love psychological games. Now, there's not much of that here in Settlers or in Catan, but I can play a little bit of like a hey, hey, do you want? I'll give you 2 sheep if for 1 brick,
Mhm.
maybe 3,
Yeah.
but that gives away what you need. It's not too deep in that regard, but
Well, it sounds like the
but
situation Greg was just describing is it would be a little bit psychological if you're
it's a
trying
little
to
bit,
build
yeah.
if you're setting down roads, you know, and signaling that you're planning to build a
Hmm.
settlement. You might want to think about the psychology of the people around the table and think, are these people going to viciously punish me for this, or am I playing with people who are
Right.
so into what they're doing that they're going to have tunnel vision and not notice me or something like that.
So real briefly, it does a
Mhm.
bunch of stuff that I love seamlessly.
Mhm.
Also, all those things that it does, you can play it with a 6-year-old. Like you can play it
Okay.
with your grandma, and you can play it with a 6 or 7-year-old. And what I like is okay. So I don't like Monopoly or anything like that, but there is some kind of nostalgia to family games, broken family games, where you'll play a game with your family members, and you know that you can always get in little Tommy's head and get him to give you sheep,
Mhm.
when you need it. There's something kind of fun about that, and I think that when you play Catan,
Back to the psychological with you.
a little bit, yeah, it's always back to the psychological, but you can play it with your family, and it could become like a family game where you get together on Sundays, and you don't want to play with grandma because she'll never trade with you, or these little stories that'll come up in your family. I love stuff like that,
Mhm.
but it's also deep enough to interest me now, years into playing other much more complicated things. I like it a
Okay.
lot.
Okay. Okay. Good. Greg, what do you think? Positives of Catan?
Positives of Catan. I mentioned in the outset about I like the theme because it reminds me of this long gone era
Yeah,
of
that
old
sounds similar to
traditional.
kind of what Eric's saying.
Yeah, but I would say not just in theme and mechanisms too. It has that feeling of an old school German game.
A little bit
And
retro.
the hallmark of those games, and again, it gives me a warm fuzzy feeling when I play them. I like those older games because when I look at more modern gateway games, family games, they tend to soften them to the point. They're afraid that people are going to get hurt if they put too much interaction in the game. You know what I mean? Like in my mind, the classic game is like everything you do is on a board that's in front of you, and then there's a couple of actions we share in the center. But Catan, I feel, still has interaction, and those old school German games did. But at the same time, despite all the interaction, it doesn't feel overly mean, right? It's light enough, like Eric was talking about. This is a game you can sit down with 10-year-old and your grandparents, and they can sit down and enjoy the game. And they do it by hiding the victory points, so you don't know when the game's going to end. No one ever feels like they're getting too far ahead. Like it does those kind of things well, and I like that about Catan.
Probably
I'm not saying
broad-based appeal.
Yeah, I think that's just what it is. It's an easy game to get people into, and even despite it being 25 years old, I've recommended this game to people before. Just recently, someone asked their family was going off to a cabin. It was 4 of them, and they were left looking for a board game to play. I gave them a few choices. They ended up playing Catan. They came back and they said, "Oh, we love that game. It's great." I think it still works. I feel, but yeah, I miss that kind of that interactivity that came with those older games.
Right.
They're kind of missing nowadays, I feel.
Sure, absolutely. All right. Well, what about negatives? Greg, what were the negatives of Catan for you?
Okay, so this is just personal, of course. Yeah. I get why people are fine with these things. I think at the end of the day, I feel Catan is a little bit too random for my taste. And I realize a lot of these gateway games have randomness in it. I'm not against it, but I feel there's more in Catan than normal. And it comes in a few places. The dice rolling for resources, that can really mess you up. So like in the game we played this week, I had an ore spot that was a 5, and that got rolled. Felt like every other dice roll came up my ore spot. And then there was a point in the game where we were completely locked out of clay, because the clay spots never got rolled, and Eric and one of the other players was sitting on it. I think it was 8 even. And it just didn't
traumatize me, which is why I'm bringing up bricks so much in this game.
Clay is so important.
Go get that clay, people.
Yeah,
which is fine. I'm not saying that's a game breaker, but the problem that I have on a personal level with that type of system is I feel like if I go to this 8 spot, if I work my way to it, I get my roads over there, I spend these resources to get on here, and I make all these crafty, strategic decisions to do that, I want the game to reward me for that effort. But there's the potential that your dice never come up, right? That it's just the capriciousness of the dice. It's just the way it goes. That's fine, and I'm not. It's a short game, so it doesn't bother me. That's one part of the randomness. The second one is just the development cards, which you draw. You could just get a knight, which is okay, or you get the Monopoly card, which is pretty powerful. Especially like there's a common tactic in Catan where you like trade away all of your resources for goods, and then you play a Monopoly card. And Monopoly card, you save 1 resource, and everybody gives you them back. So give me all your wheat after you just traded all the wheat. That's a powerful card, right? So you want that card, but you could just get a knight. Or some other cards you don't need. And the third place, it's not really random, so it's like 2.5 areas, is trading with other people. I'm fine with that. This is not a negative per se, I'll call this a neutral. I'm okay with it. But just understand that's another piece where humans could just decide, I'm not trading with you because I don't like the way you look. Right. You know what I mean? That aspect's going to be there.
If I had a nickel every time I heard that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm not trading with you, Eric, because of the way you look.
Happens all the time. But yeah, that's probably my only real negative of the game. I
think you missed 2 pieces of randomness. I mean, you got the random setup too.
I don't mind random setups. I love random setups because it happens before your decisions are made.
What about turn order for initial placement? I think that's huge.
Yeah, it is, but there's not much you can do with turn order. That every
No.
game kind of, you know what I mean? Like a lot of games have
Unless
that
it was
where,
a bidding thing.
yeah, and they do give you the whole snake draft to help mitigate that a little bit.
Mhm.
The setup doesn't bother me so much. I'm fine with that, and I love variable boards, like with the randomness
Yeah.
of the setup. To me, those are the ones in the middle. And I will say overall with Catan, I mean, I'm sure as this series progresses, people will find that I like big, heavy Euro games. That's my wheelhouse. A game of this weight, of like Catan is, this gateway style game, is only going to be so good to me.
Mhm.
You know, it's never going to be one of the greatest games of all time to me. It's just it doesn't have the muscle to
It's
pull
just
that.
the weight issue.
And I think there's a lot of games that can kind of fill this niche for me. Yeah, that's where I'm at with it.
Okay, Eric, what about you? What were the negatives from your point of view?
Well, first, I just want to say, while I do think it's one of the greatest games of all time, and I think that I can say that while also saying that I don't always want to play it. And that's because I don't always want to play it because the things that it does, I've got a taste for in such a way that Catan doesn't do it enough.
Mm.
So if I want a psychological game, I'll play something else. You know, I'll
There's a
play,
more distilled version out there somewhere.
yeah, or resource management. There's other things that give me that in a much more concentrated way. But I do think that it's one of the best games ever, and I think that it's because of all of those things working so well together, and and making a family friendly game that everybody can feel like. When you sit down to Catan, you don't feel like you've just played a bunch, like that there's randomness like in Monopoly, or that like you're just moving along like in life, the game of life. You know,
Mhm.
you do feel like you're building something, and at the end of the game, your grandma who's never played a Euro game before has a whole new experience that she's just had. At the same time, who've played it a number of times, still enjoy it because there's some strategy there that I can get into.
Mhm.
Okay, but downsides. I actually do think it's a little too long.
Oh, we didn't talk about that. What's an average playtime
I've
run?
heard 45 minutes, but honestly, I thought that with 4 players, you can expect more like an hour and a half.
Okay, Greg, is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I think an hour to hour and a half is probably normal for this.
If you're
Okay, and so
cooking through
Eric,
it,
you're
you might
saying
be
you.
able to get through it in 45 minutes. If it was 45 minutes consistently, I would say that would be perfect.
Uh-huh. Okay,
But
but
it plays for about an hour and a half to 2 hours, in my opinion. And while I have fun the whole time, uh, I do think that it's a little long for what it's giving me now. So maybe that's something to keep in mind after you've played it a lot.
mhm.
It might start to feel like, okay, like
Well, it's
2 hours of
kind of
this.
ironic because you probably, as you play it, you'll probably get more used to those things it's giving you, and then also you'll also get faster at it. So,
Yeah.
but okay, all right. So let's wrap it up then to conclude. Your overall thoughts on this game? Would you buy it? Would you recommend it? Um, I I think we kind of know where you guys stand. But just anything else you want to say about Catan, Eric?
Yeah, you should definitely get this game if you don't have it already. You should definitely play this game multiple times if you don't have it already. And you should introduce many, many people to it, because when you do that, you're going to give them an experience that they are going to remember, and it might get them interested in the genre if they haven't, if they've missed it in the past 2 decades.
Hmm. Okay, good. Greg, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a fine game. I think that's at the end. That's what I would give it. It's a fine game. I would, if I were to, I like rating things on a
Yeah,
10-point scale. I would give it probably like a 7.
a 7.
It's not a game that I'm going to run out and want to play,
Hmm.
but it's not a game that I loathe playing. You know what I mean? It's like if it comes up, oh yeah, Catan, this is fun. Yeah, I enjoy it, but I don't personally feel the need to own it. However, I will say if you've not played it, you definitely should. I mean, just for historical value. I mean,
Right.
Catan is where it is for a reason. But yeah, it's definitely a great gateway game. It's probably more responsible for getting more people in this hobby than any game out there. So I respect it for what it is. But yeah.
And that term, I don't know. I don't really like the term gateway game anymore. It's like it feels a little demeaning.
Is it?
I think so. Yeah, I think
Is
that when
it?
you say gateway game, it's like, well, first off, there's the drug connotation, like, oh, let's get you hooked. But then there's also the idea that like you're never going to stick with this. We know that's not true because there's a bajillion expansions to this game. People are still playing it. You said yourself, there's still got tournaments. People love this game.
Sure.
Well, I think the idea would be that if someone who's never done this, never played anything apart from Monopoly or Scrabble, goes into a modern board game store and sees some crazy 1,000-piece, super complicated looking monstrosity and feels intimidated, they might not feel intimidated by something like Catan, even though it's outside of sort of the typical, Hasbro, Walmart game aisle type games that you might find.
I don't think, at least when I use the term gateway, and maybe family game is a better term. I don't know. Light game. I don't know what you want to call them, but I mean it's the term that's stuck around the hobby for a long time.
I know it
Used
has,
for a very specific type of game.
And I
But
know
for
what
me,
it means.
I don't think of gateway as, look, this is your gateway game, just so you can get out of that and into heavier stuff or better stuff. I don't think that's what I mean by gateway. I think it's a gateway to the hobby.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Catan will draw you to other types of hobby games that are not Monopoly. You know what I mean?
But clever save, Warren Smith. Clever save.
No, that's what I think when I say gateway. But I disagree that everyone needs to start with Catan type game. I feel like there's plenty of people that can jump into the hobby in some much more complex game, but you just have to know the person themselves.
I don't think
But
I
if
said
I were
that you need to play it.
no, Michael was talking about how some people might be intimidated by more complex games and I think that's true.
Oh yeah.
I think that's true, but I think there are some people that could start there. But
Sure,
for
some
me,
people want to jump right into the craziest thing you can throw at them and do it.
Sure. But if I were hey, someone you came to me and says, hey, my Uncle Bob wants to play a board game. He's only ever played Monopoly, and I don't know anything about Uncle Bob. I feel okay recommending Catan, right? But I wouldn't recommend some crazy heavy game because I don't know who he is. That's what I mean by gateway. It's a good safe first taste of what the hobby might offer.
Yeah. So it sort of sounds like you're saying it's at the very least we could call it an intermediate, like you said at the beginning. It's in the Venn diagram, right? But
Yeah.
It's intermediate in that sense that it sort of is able to appeal to both of those groups: the longtime gamers who are into whatever new crazy thing there is, and the people who have never done much board gaming at all, but are down for just a slightly new experience. So, okay, all right, very good. Well, that will conclude this episode of A Piece of the Action. I want to thank Greg and Eric for helping us out with Catan, and we have a 10-game shelf that we're putting all of our games on as we rate it. Right now it's empty, so this will be the very first game that goes on at Catan. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, please do. And please stay tuned to this channel. We're going to be considering, I think, what did you say is next? Probably Carcassonne?
So I think we decided that we'll go through the list and we'll play the game if we actually own it.
Right.
I don't think anyone owns it. The next game that someone owns in our group is probably Pandemic.
Okay. So that'll probably be the next game we consider, but we're going to have an ongoing series here where we continue to go through some of these highly voted on games to do sort of our in-depth take of it. So thanks. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. We'll see you next time.